A wealthy man's daughter hadn't eaten for 2 weeks. Trapped in silence and pain until a new maid stepped into the mansion and did something so simple, yet so powerful, it changed all their lives forever. The mansion stood at the edge of the city like a silent giant. Every window was covered with expensive curtains, and the air around it felt cold and lifeless. From the outside, it looked like a dream house. Marble floors, golden gates, a garden big enough to be a park, but inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. No laughter, no voices, no sound of family. Just silence that seemed to echo through the halls. The owner of the house, Mr. Raymond Blake, was one of the richest men in the city. Everyone knew his name. He owned companies, cars, and more properties than anyone could count. But behind his success was a man who never smiled, never cared for warmth, and never looked at the world beyond his money. He was tall, always dressed in a black suit, and spoke with short, sharp words. People who worked for him followed every order without question, because if he got angry, he could fire them in a heartbeat. In that big house lived his only daughter, Clara. She was 20 years old, beautiful, and delicate like a porcelain doll, but her beauty had faded in recent weeks. Her face had lost its color, her body had grown weak, and her eyes looked hollow, as if they carried too much sadness for someone her age. For 2 whole weeks, she hadn't eaten a single proper meal. The housekeepers tried to bring her food, but she never touched it. Sometimes she would sit by her window for hours, just staring outside, watching the birds fly over the garden wall. She looked as though she wanted to fly away to no one in the mansion really understood what was happening to her. Some whispered that she was sick, others said she was just spoiled. The truth was simpler, and sadder: she was lonely. Her mother had died when she was 10, and her father buried himself in work instead of grief. After that, he treated Clara like a responsibility, not a daughter. He gave her everything money could, but dresses, jewelry, new car for her birthday, but never his time, never his affection. And now, years later, Clara's soul was starving for love even more. Then her body was starving for food. The staff in the mansion went about their duties quietly. They polished the silverware, dusted the furniture, cooked meals for Mr. Blake's business dinners. But none of them dared to talk much to Clara. They were afraid the father might see it as overstepping. The old maid, Mrs. Henson, had been the only one who truly cared. She had looked after Clara since she was a child, brushing her hair, telling her stories, sneaking her sweets when her father said no. But one day, 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Henson had suddenly left. No one explained why. Some said Mr. Blake fired her after an argument. Others said she left because she couldn't bear to see Clara suffer anymore. After Mrs. Henson's departure, Clara stopped eating. It was as if her last bit of comfort had vanished. Every morning, a tray of breakfast was placed near her bed: tea, toast, and fruit, but when the maids came back to collect it, everything was untouched. Even her favorite strawberry jam remained unopened. The cook whispered to another servant, "She'll fade away if this goes on." The other replied softly, "Don't say that. Mr. Blake will never allow anyone to talk about it." Upstairs, Clara sat in her room, surrounded by soft blue walls and white curtains. Her bed was big and covered in silk sheets, but it felt like a prison. The silence pressed against her ears. She could hear faint sounds from below: footsteps, doors closing, the hum of a vacuum, but none of it reached her heart. Sometimes she would open the window just to feel the air and pretend she was somewhere else. The garden was blooming with roses, but even the bright colors looked dull to her eyes. She felt invisible, like a shadow in her own home. Her father rarely visited her room. When he did, it was only for a few seconds. "Clara, you need to take care of yourself," he would say in a tone that sounded more like a command than concern. She would nod quietly, and he would leave before she could answer. Deep inside, she wanted to scream at him to tell him she didn't need his money, she needed his love. But she couldn't. She had forgotten how to express what she felt. At night, the mansion became even more lifeless. The servants retired to their quarters, the lights dimmed, and the long corridors filled with shadows. Clara would lie awake, her stomach aching from hunger, but her heart hurting even more. Sometimes she thought about her mother's voice, soft and gentle, calling her name. That memory was the only thing that gave her a little warmth. The next morning, when the butler brought her breakfast, he hesitated before entering. "Miss Clara," he said softly. There was no reply. He placed the tray on the table and left, his eyes full of pity. Downstairs, Mr. Blake was on the phone, shouting orders about a business deal. The mansion's luxury meant nothing when its heart was so empty outside. The garden staff trimmed the hedges, the chauffeur cleaned the cars, and the chef prepared expensive meals that no one truly enjoyed. It was a house full of people but no family, full of comfort but no happiness. The air smelled of perfume and polish, but beneath it all was the heavy scent of sadness. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Clara sat by her window again. She watched the sky turn orange and pink, and for a moment she almost smiled. But then she saw her reflection in the glass thin, pale, lifeless sand. The smile faded. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched her stomach. It hurt to move, but she didn't care. She had stopped caring about everything. Downstairs, two maids whispered in the kitchen. "Do you think Mr. Blake knows how bad it's gotten?" one asked. "He must," the other replied. "But he's too proud to admit it. He thinks everything can be solved with money." That night, the mansion felt colder than usual. A storm began outside, the wind howling through the tall trees. Lightning flashed across the windows, lighting up the halls for a moment before darkness returned. In her room, Clara didn't flinch. She sat still, lost in her thoughts, waiting for something she didn't even know what. Maybe for someone to notice. Maybe for someone to care. The house slept, but its silence was heavy, almost painful. Everyone inside went through their routines without realizing that a young girl upstairs was fading away. Not from illness, but from loneliness. She had everything anyone could dream of, yet nothing that truly mattered. And as the night deepened, the rain continued to fall softly against the windows, washing the city clean. But the mansion remained untouched, cold, perfect, and full of secrets waiting to be changed. Something was about to happen soon. Someone was about to enter that house who would break that silence forever. But for now, the mansion remained still, holding its breath, unaware that its quietest room would soon become the center of a miracle. The next morning began like every other day in the Blake mansion, quiet, polished, and without emotion. The house smelled of fresh coffee and floor wax, but the air felt empty. Servants moved quickly, careful not to make noise. Everyone knew that Mr. Blake disliked unnecessary chatter. He was sitting at the long dining table, reading the newspaper, while his untouched breakfast sat in front of him. He looked up only when the butler entered the room with a new face following behind him. "This is the new maid." "Sir," the butler said softly. "She came this morning." Mr. Blake lowered his newspaper and studied the woman standing in front of him. She looked to be in her 30s, dressed neatly in a simple uniform. Her hair was tied back, her eyes calm but confident. She didn't look frightened, though most people were nervous in front of him. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maria, sir," she answered politely. Her voice was soft but steady. He nodded once. "You've worked in big houses before?" "Yes, sir." "I've taken care of families and children too," she replied. "Good, do your work quietly. I don't like gossip or mistakes. You'll be paid well, if you perform well." His tone was cold, like a man giving orders to a machine. Maria simply nodded. She didn't expect warmth from him. She had seen men like him before, men who thought money could fix everything. Still, she needed the job. And something inside her told her this house needed her more than it knew. The butler showed her around the grand staircase, the gold-framed paintings, the endless hallways, and the spotless rooms. But when they reached the upper floor, Maria noticed one closed door. The butler lowered his voice. "That's Miss Clara's room," he said. "She hasn't been well. Just leave her tray by the door. Don't disturb her unless she calls." Maria frowned slightly. "Is she ill?" The butler hesitated. "Not exactly. She just doesn't eat or talk. We don't ask questions." Maria nodded, but her heart ached a little. She had worked in many homes, but she had never heard something like that. A girl not eating for days, locked away in silence. It didn't sound like an illness. It sounded like sorrow. Later that day, Maria prepared Clara's lunch herself. She made soup and soft bread, keeping the flavors gentle but warm. She carried the tray upstairs, her footsteps soft on the carpet. When she reached Clara's door, she paused and listened. Silence. Carefully, she knocked twice. "Miss Clara?" "It's lunchtime," she said softly. No reply. Maria waited, then slowly turned the handle and peeked inside. The room was filled with soft light from the window, but everything looked untouched. The breakfast tray from morning was still there, cold and forgotten. On the bed, a pale girl sat near the window, her knees drawn up, staring outside. Her hair was long and a little messy, and her hands trembled slightly on her lap. Maria stepped in quietly. "I'm sorry to bother you." "I brought some soup," she said gently. Clara didn't turn around. She seemed lost in her own world. Maria placed the tray on the table and stood for a moment, watching her. There was something fragile about the girl, something that made Maria's heart tighten. "I'll leave it here, miss," she said softly, then added in a kind tone, "It smells really nice today. Maybe you could try a spoon?" Still no answer. Clara's eyes didn't even blink. Maria sighed silently and left the room. Closing the door behind her, downstairs the butler shook his head. "Told you, she doesn't eat." "I know," Maria said quietly, "but she will." That evening, Maria couldn't stop thinking about Clara as she cleaned the dining room and polished the silver. Her mind kept returning to that thin, motionless girl by the window. She had seen loneliness before, but never like that. It wasn't sickness, it was heartbreak. The next morning she tried again. This time she brought porridge with honey and a few slices of apple. When she entered the room, Clara was in the same place as before. "Good morning, Miss Clara," Maria said with a small smile. "The sun looks nice today, doesn't it?" Clara blinked slowly but said nothing. Maria walked to the table and set the tray down. "I used to make this for a little girl I took care of," she said casually. "She always said the honey made her smile. Maybe it'll work for you too." Still no reaction. But this time, Clara's eyes moved slightly toward the tray. Maria noticed. She didn't say anything more, just smiled softly and left the room. When she came back an hour later, the tray looked the same, but the spoon had moved. It wasn't much, but it was something. Over the next few days, Maria kept trying in quiet ways. She spoke to Clara gently, even when she didn't answer. She opened the curtains wider so the room looked brighter. She placed fresh flowers by the window, saying, "These smell like spring." Sometimes she told short stories while she cleaned. Funny little things about people she had worked for, or about her own childhood. She never forced Clara to respond. She just kept her voice warm and kind. One afternoon, while Maria was dusting the bookshelf, she heard a faint whisper behind her. "Why do you talk so much?" Maria turned, surprised but smiling. Clara was looking at her with tired eyes. Her voice was weak but real. "Well," Maria said softly, "because silence feels too heavy sometimes." Clara didn't reply, but her lips curved just a little. Almost a smile. When Maria told the butler that Miss Clara had spoken, he didn't believe her. "Impossible," he said. "She hasn't said a word to anyone in weeks." But Maria knew what she had heard. That night, she prayed silently for the girl. She didn't know what had broken Clara so badly, but she promised herself she would help her find her strength again, no matter what it took. The next day, when Maria brought lunch, she found Clara sitting on the edge of the bed. It was the first time she wasn't by the window. "I'm not hungry," Clara said, before Maria could speak. Maria nodded gently. "That's fine, but maybe your body is, even if you're not." Clara stared at her. "Why do you care?" Maria placed the tray down and met her eyes. "Because someone should." Clara looked away quickly, her throat tightening. No one had said words like that to her in a long time. Not her father, not the servants, no one. Maria didn't push further. She simply left the tray and walked out quietly. That night, when she came to collect it, the soup bowl was half empty. For the first time in 2 weeks, Clara had eaten. Downstairs, Maria smiled quietly to herself. She didn't tell anyone, not even the butler. Some victories were too small and too precious to share, But her peace didn't last long. The next morning, Mr. Blake noticed Maria carrying food upstairs again. "Why are you still taking meals to that room?" he asked sharply. Maria met his gaze with calm respect. "Because she's your daughter, sir, and she needs to eat." His eyes hardened. "You will do as you're told. Don't get involved in things you don't understand." Maria nodded politely, but inside she made a promise. She would not stop trying. Because she had seen something in Clara's eyes that morning, a faint light trying to come back to life. And as she walked away, she didn't know that her kindness was about to change everything in that house. The silence that had haunted the mansion for years was beginning to crack, one gentle word at a time. Days began to pass quietly, but something inside the big mansion started to shift. The silence that once filled the air no longer felt as heavy. It was still there, but now it carried small sounds, soft footsteps, a gentle laugh, the clinking of a spoon against a bowl. Maria's patience was working. Clara, the lonely daughter who hadn't eaten for 2 weeks, was beginning to come back to life slowly, like a flower opening after a long winter every morning. Maria brought her meals with the same calm smile. Sometimes it was porridge with honey, sometimes light soup with bread. Clara never finished the food, but she always took a few bites now. For Maria, that was enough to keep hoping. She never pushed, never begged her to eat more. She just sat nearby, cleaning or folding clothes. Talking softly about ordinary things, Maria said one afternoon while polishing the silver mirror in the corner. "When I was little, my mother used to say that the sky listens to people who talk kindly. That's why I always try to speak softly. I think the sky remembers gentle voices." Clara looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her lips curved slightly. "Then the sky must like you," she whispered. Maria turned and smiled. "Maybe it does, but it would like you more if you spoke to it too." Clara looked away quickly, pretending to focus on her food, but inside, she felt something warm, a small spark of emotion she hadn't felt in a long time. As the days went by, Clara started to talk more. At first, her words were small, just answers to Maria's questions. But slowly her voice grew steadier. She told Maria about the roses she used to plant with her mother, about the books she liked, and how she used to paint when she was younger. But whenever Maria mentioned her father, Clara went quiet again. One evening, Maria gently asked, "Do you ever have dinner with your father?" Clara shook her head. "He eats downstairs with his business guests. He doesn't like being disturbed. Do you ever talk to him?" Clara gave a sad little laugh. "Not really. He says he's busy. He's always busy." Maria felt her heart ache. She had seen that kind of pain before, children who grew up surrounded by money but starved of love. She wanted to hug the girl, but she knew it wasn't the right time. Clara needed patience, not pity. That night, as Maria walked down the long hallway, she saw Mr. Blake standing near his study. He looked at her with suspicion. "You've been spending too much time upstairs," he said coldly. Maria met his gaze calmly. "She's getting better, sir. She's eating again." Frowned slightly, surprised but unwilling to show it. "Just make sure you remember your place. You're a maid, not her friend." Maria nodded respectfully, but inside she felt anger rising. If caring made her cross the line, then she didn't mind crossing it. The next morning, Clara was waiting by the window when Maria came in. "I heard Father yelling last night," she said quietly. "He's always angry. I think he hates this house." Maria placed the breakfast tray down. "Maybe he hates the emptiness," she said softly. "Some people build walls so high that even love can't climb over them." Clara stared at her, her eyes wide. "You talk like a poet," Maria laughed gently. "No, I just talk like someone who's seen too much." Clara hesitated, then asked, "Were you ever sad like me?" Maria paused, thinking of her own past, her little brother who had died young. Her years of working in other people's homes, the loneliness she carried in silence. She nodded slowly. "Yes. But I learned that sadness is like a room with no doors. You have to make your own way out, even if it's just one step at a time." Clara looked at her hands. "I don't know how." Maria smiled kindly. "Then I'll help you." From that day, things began to change faster. Maria encouraged Clara to walk in the garden for a few minutes each morning. At first, Clara refused. "People will stare," she said. "Let them," Maria replied. The garden misses you. Finally, Clara agreed. The first time she stepped outside, the sunlight made her squint. The air smelled of roses and rain. Her legs trembled, but Maria held her gently by the arm. "One step at a time," she whispered, as they walked slowly through the garden. One of the gardeners stopped and stared, shocked to see the girl who hadn't been outside for months. Clara felt shy, but Maria smiled proudly at her. "See? The flowers remember you," she said. Clara laughed softly. It was the first real laugh that had come from her in weeks. That evening, she ate a little more than usual. The butler noticed and whispered to Maria, "You're a miracle worker." Maria shook her head. No, she's just remembering how to live. But not everyone was happy about the change. Mr. Blake began to notice how often Clara's room lights stayed on, how her meals were being prepared separately, how she had started walking outside. He didn't understand what was happening. He only saw someone else's maid changing things in his house without his permission. One afternoon, called Maria into his study. His face was stern as always. "I hear my daughter is walking around again," he said. "I don't want her overexerting herself. She's weak." Maria clasped her hands calmly. "She's getting stronger, sir. The walks are helping her." "I didn't ask for your opinion," he snapped. "Do your job and stay in your place." Maria took a slow breath. "With all due respect, sir, my job is to take care of her. That's what I'm doing." For a moment, Mr. Blake looked like he might explode, but something in her tone stopped him. No one had ever spoken to him like that, firm, but without fear. Finally, he turned away and said quietly, "Leave." Maria bowed slightly and left, but as she walked down the hallway, she whispered to herself, "You can fire me, but you can't stop her from healing." That evening, when she entered Clara's room, the girl looked worried. "Did he scold you?" Maria smiled faintly. "He tried. But I'm tougher than I look." Clara's eyes softened. "I don't want you to get in trouble because of me." "You're not trouble," Maria said firmly. "You're a reason." That night, Clara ate an entire bowl of soup. For the first time in weeks, she didn't push the tray away. After dinner, she sat by the piano in her room. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, uncertain. Then she pressed one note, then another. The soft music filled the air, trembling but beautiful. Maria stood near the door, listening quietly, her eyes glistening. When the last note faded, Clara turned to her. "My mother used to play this song," she said softly. "I know," Maria whispered. "I could hear it in your heart before you even played it." Clara smiled faintly, tears shining in her eyes. "I think I want to live again." Maria nodded, her voice gentle but full of hope. "Then you will." Outside, the night sky was full of stars, and for the first time in years, light seemed to return to the mansion not from lamps or chandeliers, but from something far stronger. It came from a bond between two souls, one broken and one brave, slowly pulling each other out of the dark. One morning, the sky was bright and clear, and a warm light poured through Clara's window. She was sitting at her desk, painting small flowers on a white canvas. Her cheeks had a faint color again, and her hands didn't shake as much as they used to. For the first time in months, she looked almost alive. Maria watched her from the doorway, smiling quietly. Every day she saw the girl's strength returning, and it filled her heart with pride. But deep down, she knew there was still one thing missing. Clara hadn't yet faced her father. Mr. Blake still avoided her, busy with meetings and phone calls. He didn't notice that the daughter he had almost lost was slowly coming back to life, one spoonful at a time. Whenever Maria saw him pass by, his expression was the same, cold, proud, untouchable. He acted like nothing in his house needed fixing. That day, Maria decided she was going to do something bold. She wanted Clara to eat a full meal, not just bits of soup or bread. She wanted her to feel what it meant to truly enjoy food again, to feel warmth and comfort. So she planned something special. When lunchtime came, Maria didn't bring the usual tray. Instead, she went to the kitchen and began to cook with her own hands. She made a dish that her mother used to make for her when she was a child, soft rice with chicken and vegetables, cooked in a gentle broth that smelled of home. As the food simmered, the air filled with a delicious warmth that made even the cook pause. "What's that smell?" he asked, something that might bring a smile back. Maria replied simply. When she carried the tray upstairs, the aroma filled the hallway. Clara looked up as soon as the door opened. "It smells different today," she said curiously. Maria set the tray on the table and smiled. "It's special. I made it myself. It's food that feels like a hug." Clara gave a small laugh, her eyes soft. "You're not supposed to cook. The chef might get angry." "Let him," Maria said playfully. "I've faced worse." She placed a bowl in front of Clara. The steam curled in the air, carrying the scent of comfort and care. Clara hesitated. She picked up the spoon, but didn't eat right away. "What if it doesn't stay down?" she whispered. "It will," Maria said gently. "Just trust me." Clara took a slow breath and brought the spoon to her lips. The first taste made her eyes widen slightly. She chewed carefully, swallowed, then looked up at Maria with surprise. "It's good," she said softly. Maria smiled. "Then have another bite." Clara did. And another. Slowly, spoon by spoon, she finished half the bowl. It was the most she had eaten in 2 weeks. When she finally stopped, she looked tired but peaceful, like someone who had finally remembered what being alive felt like. "You did it," Maria whispered, tears in her eyes. Clara gave a weak smile. "I didn't think I could." Maria reached out and touched her hand gently. "You just needed someone to believe you could." Just then, the door opened sharply. Mr. Blake stood there, his face dark with anger. He had come upstairs after noticing the unusual smell drifting through the house. "What is going on here?" he barked. His eyes went from the tray of food to his daughter, then to Maria. "Did I not say you were to follow my instructions?" Maria stood up straight, her heart pounding. "Your daughter needed a real meal, sir. She's been getting stronger." Mr. Blake's face hardened. "That's not your decision to make. You are a maid. You are paid to serve, not to interfere." Clara looked frightened. "Father, please," she began, but he cut her off. "You stay out of this," he snapped. "Maria, pack your things. You're finished here." The room went silent. Maria didn't move. Her eyes filled with tears, but not of fear of disappointment. She looked at him and said quietly, "Sir, I've worked in many homes, but I've never seen a father who can't see his own child dying in front of him. You can fire me if you want, but you can't stop the truth." Mr. Blake froze. No one had ever spoken to him like that. He opened his mouth to shout, but the words wouldn't come. Clara stood up suddenly. "Stop it," she cried. Her voice shook, but she didn't care. "You can't send her away. She saved me. You didn't even notice I was starving, and she's the one who made me eat again." Mr. Blake turned to her, stunned. Clara's face was red, her hands trembling, but her eyes were full of fire. "I thought you didn't care if I lived or died," she said, her voice cracking. But she did. She cared enough to stay, to talk to me, to make me eat. "You can't take her away." For the first time, Mr. Blake's face softened. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. He looked at his daughter, the daughter he had ignored for years and for a brief second. Guilt flickered in his eyes. Maria stood quietly, her hands folded. "She needs love, sir. Not rules. Not silence. Just love." The room was filled with heavy silence. Then Mr. Blake took a deep breath and looked at his daughter again. Her eyes were wet with tears, her face pale but alive. Without another word, turned and walked out of the room. Clara sank back into her chair, tears rolling down her cheeks. "He hates me now," she whispered. Maria knelt beside her. "No, child. He's not angry at you. He's angry at himself. He just doesn't know how to show it." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, staring at the stars. Maria stayed quietly by the door, ready if she needed anything. Hours passed, and finally Clara said, "Do you think he'll ever understand?" Maria smiled gently. "One day he will. You opened a door in his heart today. It might take time, but he'll walk through it." The next morning, something strange happened. When Maria came downstairs, Mr. Blake was already in the kitchen. He stood there awkwardly, holding a cup of coffee. "The food you made yesterday," he said slowly. "It smelled nice." Maria looked at him, surprised. "Thank you, sir." He hesitated, then added, "You may continue your work upstairs." That was his way of saying she wasn't fired. Maria nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir." When she went back to Clara's room, the girl looked hopeful. "He didn't send you away?" Maria smiled. "Not this time." Clara sighed with relief and smiled weakly. Maybe he does care a little. Maria placed a new tray on the table, fresh bread, warm milk, and fruit. "He just doesn't know how to show it yet," she said. "But he will." Clara took a piece of bread and began to eat slowly, smiling at Maria between bites. For the first time, her laughter filled the room, not forced or quiet, but real and bright. Downstairs, Mr. Blake stood in the hallway listening to the faint sound of his daughter's laughter. His chest tightened, and for the first time in years, he felt something he thought he had forgotten: love, mixed with regret. In that moment, he finally understood what Maria had done. She hadn't just fed his daughter's body, she had fed her spirit. And even though his pride had tried to fight it, he knew she had done the unthinkable. She had brought his daughter back to life. The morning sun poured softly into the mansion, touching every corner with golden light. The air inside felt different now, warmer, lighter, alive. For the first time in months, laughter could be heard faintly upstairs. Clara sat by her window, her cheeks glowing with color as she brushed her hair. On the small table beside her sat a plate of fruit, half eaten. She had eaten breakfast again without being asked. Maria watched her proudly from the doorway, her heart full. She had seen Clara transform from a silent, fading shadow into someone who smiled again. The change was slow, gentle, but powerful. Each meal she finished, each word she spoke felt like a small miracle. "Are we going to the garden today?" Clara asked, her eyes bright. "Yes," Maria said. "The roses are blooming again. They've missed you." Clara laughed softly. "You always say that the flowers miss me, 'cause they do," Maria replied with a grin. "They told me this morning." As they walked through the mansion, the other servants stopped and stared. They had grown used to seeing a ghost of a girl moving through the halls. But now, Clara looked alive. Her steps were still slow, but her spirit was stronger. Even the butler smiled as they passed. "Good morning, Miss Clara," he said warmly. "Good morning," she replied shyly. When they stepped outside, the sun felt gentle on her skin. The garden was full of color: red, white, and pink roses dancing in the breeze. Clara took a deep breath, her eyes shining. "I used to sit here with my mother," she whispered. "We would drink tea and talk about everything." "Ah," Maria smiled softly. "You can do that again. Maybe not with her, but with someone who cares just as much." Clara turned and looked at her with affection. "Like you," Maria nodded. "Like me." They sat together on the garden bench, listening to the birds. It felt peaceful, like the world had slowed down just for them. For a long time, Clara said nothing. Then she spoke quietly. "I think I'm ready to talk to Father." Maria turned to her, surprised. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Clara said firmly. "I've been afraid for too long, but I want him to know I'm still here. I want him to know I'm not broken anymore." Maria smiled, her eyes full of pride. "Then you should tell him. He needs to hear your voice." Later that evening, Clara waited nervously in the living room. The big clock ticked slowly on the wall. She had asked the butler to tell her father she wanted to speak with him. When Mr. Blake finally entered, he looked tired, as if he had been carrying a weight no one else could see. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, his voice cautious. Clara stood up. "Yes, Father. Please, sit." He raised an eyebrow, surprised by her confidence, but sat down anyway. Clara's hands trembled a little, but she took a deep breath. "I know you're busy," she began softly. "You've always been busy, and I know you think working hard means taking care of me, but I didn't need all this." She gestured around the room. "I needed you." Mr. Blake's eyes flickered with pain. He opened his mouth to speak, but she continued. "When Mother died, I thought you'd hold me, but you didn't. You just disappeared into your office. I was small, but I still knew what loneliness felt like, and it never left me." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. "I stopped eating because I felt invisible. I didn't think it mattered if I lived or not." Mr. Blake's hands tightened on the armrest. His throat moved, but no sound came out. "And then Maria came," Clara said, her eyes filling with tears. "She talked to me when no one else did. She made me laugh again. She made me eat again. She cared when you didn't." Mr. Blake closed his eyes, his jaw trembling. For years he had told himself he was doing the right thing, working, building, providing, but hearing those words from his daughter broke something inside him. When he finally spoke, "Clara, I didn't know how to help you. After your mother, I didn't know how to feel anything. I thought if I worked hard it would fill the emptiness. But it didn't." Tears streamed down Clara's cheeks. "You could have just talked to me." "I know," he said, his eyes glistening. "I'm sorry, my dear. I'm so sorry." For a moment, the mansion was silent again, but not the cold silence from before. This silence was soft, healing. Then, slowly, Mr. Blake stood and reached for her hand. She hesitated, then took it. "I'll do better," he said, his voice trembling. "I promise." Clara nodded, her heart swelling with something she had longed for, a father's love. When Maria came into the room later, she saw them sitting together, side by side. For the first time, there was peace in both their faces. That night, dinner was different. The long table, once filled with empty seats, now had both father and daughter eating together. The servants watched quietly, smiling to themselves. Maria served them both, her eyes shining with quiet joy. "This tastes wonderful," Mr. Blake said awkwardly, looking at his daughter. "It's the same soup Maria made for me," Clara said softly. "The one that saved me." Mr. Blake looked at Maria, and for the first time, he smiled, truly smiled. "Thank you," he said simply. Maria bowed her head. "I just did what anyone with a heart would do, sir." After dinner, Clara played the piano while her father listened. The song echoed through the halls, filling the mansion with warmth it hadn't felt in years. Maria stood by the doorway, watching, her heart full. She knew this was the moment she had been hoping for. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion changed. The staff began to talk freely again. Laughter returned, and Clara's health improved completely. She started painting again, and her father even hung one of her paintings in his office. He began spending his evenings at home, sitting in the garden with her, learning how to be a father again. One afternoon, he found Maria in the kitchen. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "You didn't just save my daughter. You saved me too." Maria smiled gently. "She saved herself, sir. I just helped her remember how strong she was." He nodded slowly. "Still, you did something no doctor or money could do." Maria's eyes softened. "Sometimes all a person needs is kindness. It costs nothing, but it changes everything." That evening, as the sun set behind the mansion, Clara stood by her window again, the same window where she had once sat silently, starving and lost. But now her eyes were full of life. Maria joined her, and together they watched the sky turn golden and pink. "It's beautiful," Clara whispered. "Yes," Maria said softly. "Because you're finally seeing it again." Clara smiled and took her hand. "You changed my world, Maria." Maria squeezed her fingers gently. "No, my dear. You just needed someone to remind you that your world was still worth living in." Downstairs, Mr. Blake looked up at the sound of their laughter. For the first time in years, his house felt like a home, not just walls and wealth, but a place where hearts had healed. And as the evening light faded, the mansion stood quietly, no longer cold or silent. It was filled with warmth, love, and the echo of a miracle that had begun with one simple act of Maid who dared to care.